Last week, I criticised the Greens and the Australian Republican movement and others who were looking to push their political cause, especially the Republic, but Indigenous issues too, within hours of the Queen's death. It was just so obviously insensitive and rude. It was disrespectful towards the Queen and her family and everybody else who was grieving. But hey, it's a free world, right? And people are allowed to make balls of themselves if they want to, which is why some episodes here are a real worry. Look at women's NRL player Caitlin Moran. She issued a tasteless and offensive tweet about the Queen's death. It was disgusting, and Moran ought to be ashamed of herself. But in the wake of the inevitable media controversy, Moran was banned from playing for one game. There's only 5 normal rounds in an NRLW season. And she was issued with a suspended fine equating to 25% of her season salary. So a tweet that had nothing to do with her game hurts her livelihood. Now, it's hard to have sympathy, I know. It was an abhorrent tweet. But I've railed against the way Israel Folau was hounded out of rugby because of his social media posts. So I've got to be consistent. However vile Moran's post was, this punishment has to be a grave infringement of her freedom of expression, surely. It goes further. Indigenous journalist and a former workmate here at Sky News, Stan Grant, has written passionately about how Indigenous Australians can draw a link between their historical mistreatment to the institution of the Crown, and importantly, how over the past fortnight they've been expected to remain silent on these issues. Grant raises some pertinent and fair points. Public grieving for someone we don't know should not be compulsory. None of this is clear-cut, so let me take up the issues with Ethics Centre Director Dr Simon Longstaff. Thanks for joining us, Simon.
Pleasure, Chris. Great to see you.
Let's start off with Caitlin Moran. No one would defend her tweet. It was just a vile tweet directed at the deceased monarch. But is it an infringement of her freedom of expression for her then to be fined and miss out on her livelihood for that tweet?
Well, I think there's a couple of things about this, Chris. Firstly, I suppose the game has the right to protect its reputation, but I think this response was entirely disproportionate. I mean, I don't think it bears comparison with Israel Folau. He had formerly had an offence, if you like, where he'd done something and he'd been called in, not punished, but had promised not to continue doing what he did, and then broke his word. And that was really the centre of what that was about, not so much what he said. Although what he did say caused lots of problems, because instead of making a tasteless comment just about one person who was dead, he was actually saying that a whole group of people, because of their chosen lifestyle, were going to be condemned to hell forever. But I think the big thing in this, and I think something that you and I could agree, is that there is a difference between the life of the individual, Elizabeth Windsor, who was Queen of Great Britain, and the institution of the monarchy, which never dies and which just passes on from person to person. And I can understand how Indigenous people have seen that crown turning up in the uniform of those who hunted them or jailed them or took their kids away, where there would be this overwhelming emotional response, which I think Stan Grant captured in his excellent article. So for me, yes, what she said was deeply disrespectful. It didn't really take account of the difference between the Queen, the person, Elizabeth, and the role. But she's a young person, may not get it. And I just think the response was completely over the top.
Yeah, well, there are other people who are more mature, have had more experience in these matters and have more responsibility to the public. And they are politicians, of course. Let's look at Marine Faruqi, who's a Greens senator, and have a look at what she tweeted. She said, condolences to those who knew the Queen, but she can't mourn the leader of a racist empire built on stolen lives, land and wealth, the wealth of colonised people. We're reminded of the urgency of treaty and First Nations, justice and reparations for British colonies and becoming a republic. Now, agree or disagree with that view, she's entitled to express it, isn't she?
She's entitled to express it. It may not necessarily be the most helpful time to do it. It may not have some of the nuance that you'd want that I was just trying to unpack. But yes, she has every right to do it. And there are some people who will be so deeply moved by the events, and we've seen that the emotion falls on both sides. Some people deeply moved by a life of continuing service given by the late Queen, others enraged by what the monarchy oversaw. But the thing that we have to also understand about the person, whoever is the monarch at the time, is, I mean, unfortunately, they are responsible for the bus, but they never get to sit in the driver's seat either. They're never able to actually make a decision. And so, again, this is part of the complexity. So I've been taking the last 10 days or so as a time to reflect on all of these institutions. And I think there are some really important debates, such as you've been discussing earlier on in this segment, which we need to have to engage with.
Yeah, part of it is timing. You've got to have the Republican debate, but I think within hours of the Queen dying, that was just tasteless. But a week later, surely people are going to be able to talk about all these issues.
Yeah, we do. And there's no avoiding them. And the degree to which they are suppressed, particularly in the name of the institution, which is seen by many to have caused so much harm to so many people, our own fellow citizens, to say you can't talk about it, keep on setting these artificial deadlines, all that's going to do is to inflame that sense of hurt. And so I would much rather have the conversation come out, hope that people are able to do it in a respectful way that acknowledges the difference between the individual and the institution. And in the case of people who make mistakes about it, counsel them first before we punish them. Let's not shut it all down without explaining why there may be some ethical boundaries to be applied.
Great stuff, Simon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, seeing you, Chris. Bye.
That's Simon Longstaff, who's the Executive Director of the Ethics Centre. And I think, when you have this debate, it allows people to put the other point of view too, and they highlight not any instances where the Crown or Britain or Australia have done the wrong thing in the past, but all the good things that have come out of the past as well, including democracy, rule of law, freedom of speech, health, education, all the rest of it.